There are roughly 20 quadrillion ants on Earth right now. That's not a typo, 20,000 trillion. If you weighed every ant on the planet, they'd outweigh every wild bird and mammal combined. And yet most people walk past thousands of them a week without a single thought. Now imagine every one of those 20 quadrillion ants disappears at once. Every species, every colony, every super colony spanning entire continents, gone, instantly. You'd probably notice the ants missing from your kitchen counter before you noticed anything else. But underground and across entire ecosystems, something far bigger is about to unravel. Let's set the rules and find out. Every ant species, all roughly 14,000 of them, from tiny fire ants to sprawling Argentine ant supercolonies, disappears simultaneously and permanently. Everything else stays as it is. Other insects, plants, larger animals, human agriculture and infrastructure. We're asking what happens when a species most people barely think about goes to zero, worldwide, forever. Ants are what ecologists call ecosystem engineers, organisms that physically reshape their environment just by existing. That term usually gets used for beavers or elephants. Ants earn it too, just at a much smaller scale, repeated an almost incomprehensible number of times. First week. In the first hours, you genuinely see almost nothing. No dramatic visual, no obvious gap in the sky or forest canopy. This is the quietest disappearance in the whole series so far. But underground, the change is immediate. Ants constantly dig, tunnel, and move soil. Collectively, ants and termites turn over more soil globally than earthworms do, aerating it and improving water absorption as a byproduct of simply building their homes. Without that constant tunneling, soil in ant-dense regions begins compacting slightly within days, reducing how well it absorbs rain and lets oxygen reach plant roots. You've probably stepped over an anthill without a second thought your whole life. Kind of wild that it was doing more structural work than most home renovation projects, honestly. That's just the soil. What happens next involves an entire hidden economy of plants that quietly depend on ants for something you'd never guess: their front door. First month. Within the first weeks, two major plant relationships start breaking down. First, seed dispersal. An estimated 11,000 plant species worldwide rely partly or entirely on ants to carry their seeds away from the parent plant and bury them, a process called myrmecochory. Without ants, those seeds simply pile up near the parent plant, competing for the same light and nutrients, and germination rates drop. Second, and more dramatically, bodyguard duty. Many plant species, especially certain acacia trees across Africa, evolved a direct mutualism with specific ant species. The plant provides ants with shelter in hollow thorns and sugary nectar, and in exchange, the ants aggressively swarm and bite anything that tries to eat the tree, from insects to full-grown elephants. Remove the ants, and that defense system disappears overnight. This isn't hypothetical, because scientists have already documented what happens when this exact relationship breaks down, and the ripple effects go somewhere nobody expected. In Kenya's Laikipia region, an invasive ant species called the big-headed ant has been spreading across savanna ecosystems, displacing native acacia ants without providing the same fierce defense against elephants. Researchers tracking this invasion published findings showing that as native ants disappeared, elephants began breaking far more acacia trees, opening up the previously dense, tree-covered landscape into more exposed grassland. That habitat change had a consequence nobody initially predicted. Lions who rely on cover from acacia trees to ambush zebras became measurably less successful at hunting zebra in the more open terrain. Lions responded by shifting their diet toward buffalo instead, a completely different, riskier prey animal, to compensate. Sit with that for a second. An invasive ant, smaller than a grain of rice, ended up changing what lions eat in Kenya. Now imagine that exact mechanism: ants disappearing, trees losing protection, landscapes opening up, playing out everywhere acacia ant partnerships exist across Africa, and every equivalent plant-ant mutualism worldwide simultaneously. Lions changing their diet because of ants is already strange enough. But that's one ecosystem, one mutualism. What happens when you scale this disruption up to every ant-dependent relationship on the planet and let it run for years instead of one field study? 10 years later. A decade in, seed dispersal failures have measurably reduced plant diversity in regions that relied heavily on ant-based dispersal, particularly in certain forest understories where myrmecoccurous plants, the seed-spreading kind, make up a significant portion of ground-level vegetation. Termites, which fill an ecologically similar niche to ants in many regions, begin expanding into some of the vacated soil engineering role, though they don't replicate the specific plant defense partnerships ants provided. Meanwhile, without ants preying on and competing with other insects, certain pest insect populations, aphids in particular, which ants sometimes farm, but also sometimes control depending on the species, show mixed but generally upward trends in affected agricultural regions. You know that mildly satisfying feeling of watching ants dismantle a dead beetle on the sidewalk in about 10 minutes flat? That's an entire invisible sanitation department that just clocked out permanently. 10 years shows the ecological bookkeeping starting to add up. But there's one group of animals about to feel this loss far more directly than anyone expected, and it's not the one you'd guess first. "50 years later." By 50 years, species that specialized in eating ants and termites face serious decline. Anteaters, pangolins, aardvarks, and numerous bird species built their entire ecological niche around a food source that made up the bulk of their diet. Remove ants, and these specialist species either go extinct in the hardest-hit regions or, in rare cases, adapt to alternate prey with much lower success rates. Broader insect population dynamics shift too. Ants are both predators and prey within insect communities, controlling some populations while feeding others up the food chain, including birds, reptiles, and small mammals. Their absence creates uneven, sometimes contradictory ripple effects. Some insect populations boom from reduced predation, while animals that ate ants directly decline from lost food supply. 50 years in, we've mostly been tracking ecological bookkeeping, species up, species down. What happens by a century starts asking a bigger question. Does the ground itself, quite literally, hold together the same way? "100 years later." A century out, soil health in regions that depended most heavily on ant activity, particularly arid and semi-arid ecosystems where ants are disproportionately important soil engineers, shows measurable, chronic degradation. Reduced soil aeration and water absorption, compounding over 100 years without correction, contribute to lower agricultural productivity and slower ecosystem recovery from droughts in affected regions. Specialist ant-eating species that survived the initial decline have mostly stabilized at dramatically reduced populations, occupying a much smaller ecological footprint than a century earlier. Plant communities in the hardest-hit regions have permanently shifted toward wind-dispersed and self-pollinating species, since ant-dependent plants simply couldn't keep pace with the loss of their dispersal system. A century of soil and species-level damage is already a lot to sit with. But there's one more jump worth taking. far enough that we have to be honest about where real science ends and pure speculation begins. 500 years later. We need to flag something clearly here. Everything up to this point has been grounded in documented ecology, including real field research like the Kenya lion study. 500 years out, we're well past that. This is speculation, not science. It's plausible that some other insect group, termites, certain beetle lineages, or entirely new evolutionary branches, gradually expands to fill significant parts of the soil engineering and seed dispersal roles ants once dominated, especially in regions where the ecological pressure to fill that gap is strongest. It's equally plausible that some highly specialized relationships, like the acacia ant partnership, simply never get replaced, and the landscapes that depended on them settle into a permanently different, more open, less tree-dense version of themselves, not unlike what researchers already observed happening in miniature, in real time, in Kenya. We genuinely don't know which future is more likely, and honestly, neither does anyone else. That's not a cop-out, it's just where the evidence runs out. Let's separate the documented research from anything oversimplified. True and well documented. The Kenya study linking invasive ants, acacia tree damage, elephant behavior, and lion hunting success is real peer-reviewed field research, not a speculative connection. Ants' role in soil engineering and seed dispersal for thousands of plant species is also solid established ecological science. Worth nuancing. Not every region on Earth depends on ants to the same degree. The acacia antlion cascade is specific to certain African savanna ecosystems, and outcomes elsewhere would likely look different, sometimes far less dramatic, depending on local species and climate. This isn't a universal one-size-fits-all collapse, it's a patchwork of consequences that varies enormously by region. So losing every ant on Earth wouldn't look like a disaster movie. It would look like soil quietly compacting, plants quietly failing to spread, and, as one real research team in Kenya already discovered, lions quietly changing what they hunt because of something too small to notice underfoot. You've made it through 6 of these now. Kind of impressive, honestly, for someone who probably has work in 5 hours. Next time, we're heading back into the ocean. Every whale on Earth, gone. Subscribe and tell me in the comments. Did you expect ants to matter this much? Or did this one genuinely surprise you?